Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbach.
Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited because we're going to have a great discussion today that's going to help us all move onward and upward faster, because I have Judy Ryan on the show with us today. Judy, welcome.
Thank you, Jim. I'm happy to be here.
Now, Judy Ryan was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and she is the 5th of 6 children, and she had a safe and affectionate upbringing. However, her parents believed that their job was to instill only the beliefs and behaviors they believed in within each of their children without any input from them. This was challenging as her parents were extreme in their views about politics and religion. Because there was no receptivity to the unique thoughts and feelings of the children, Judy and her siblings were intelligently and emotionally neglected and oppressed. And this has actually led to Judy's life's work. Judy's mission is to create a world in which all people love their lives. She raised her 3 children on a shared power, responsibility-based model. By the time her children were 4 years old, they each knew how to run a weekly family meeting in which leadership was rotated and everyone had a voice and shared power. The parenting model Judy focused on was about developing leadership, intrinsic motivation, emotional intelligence, and task ownership so that her kids could manage their relationships, their own productivity, engagement, and more. She eliminated common practices that would diminish each one's need to feel empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing. Instead of stopping at loving her children, she listened to their ideas and feelings and helping them to learn, to lead and follow flexibly, and to be critical thinkers rather than people pleasers. In using this model, Judy healed her own childhood deficits and saw the positive impacts that are possible in other settings. Now, this is the basis of her decades of work in corporate, nonprofit, government, education, family settings, and more. Beginning in the 1980s, Judy taught a human systems model to parents. Then in 1998, she began to work full-time with companies to bring them concepts that aligned with what is now recognized as transformational leadership and team culture evolution. Because she was initially a parent doing this alone, her work involves engaging all stakeholders. For example, when working in a corporate setting, she involves the entire workforce from the CEO to frontline staff. And when working in school reform, she has her team at LifeWorks Systems, engaging teachers, school administrators, parents, and a neighborhood team and the students. This has won her awards. The legacy Judy is proud to leave behind can be described by a recent call she received from a high school principal in the spring of 2021. She had participated in Judy's reform model in her first year teaching 20 years earlier. And she told Judy that not only did she become an exceptional teacher and principal, that she won Teacher of the Year awards multiple times and attributes her effectiveness with students to what she learned from Judy. She said schools were just now bringing in a program similar to Judy's, redirecting negative behavior topic, an alternative to punishment, bribing, and permissiveness. And it was not even as comprehensive as the one Judy brought in 20 years ago. And for this work, Judy and her company won the Vanguard Award for Innovation from the St. Louis Mental Health Board for her work in some of the most at-risk neighborhoods. Judy still lives in St. Louis and is a recognized thought leader, writing 2 columns with over 200 articles to date, and is currently producing her own TV program. Judy was married for 22 years and divorced in 2002. She is a mother of 5 grandchildren and 5 grown children and 9 grandchildren. And they are all powerful in their lives and work due to leadership, development opportunities, to take initiative, and to respect the respect that they were shown as children. Judy Ryan, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
I am happy to help if I'm able to here.
Now, that was a rather long bio, but I think it was important because there's a lot of context that comes from that. And that's also one reason why we do this on the Fast Leader Show, is to have these more, humanistic types of bios, because it's really interesting to me how all of the things that we experience in our life now become our mission, vision, and purpose, and something that we help others, to overcome, because we've had struggles in that area. So thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. Thanks for reading all of that.
Okay. So now give us some understanding about, when you start talking about systems, some of the systems that you're utilizing, and some of the things that, are common struggles that, quite frankly, if we just all knew a different path in a different way, we can make some significant difference with.
Yeah, well, first of all, Jim, I agree with you. If we knew better, we would do better. And to kind of bring what that bio says into the 21st century, right now, people are dealing with, in organizations, they're dealing with how do we keep up with diversity and inclusion? How do we keep up with globalization? How do we keep up with the complexity and digital transformation and agile and all these different trends right now? And what is happening is people are kind of hitting a wall of the human systems. And so for centuries, I think people have sort of felt like working and dealing with the people aspect is a nice to have. It's not necessarily a need to have. And that's changing right now. And so one of the things that is really inherent in the bio that you read is I learned a particular psychology model that when I first heard it, I thought, oh, no wonder this guy didn't get a lot of press, because he was around during Freud and Jung. Because if you really understand his model, we'd have to change the win-lose dynamics and the power structures that we're operating from. And what I'm seeing today is where culture evolution is going, is moving in a direction that's the same as the model that I'm using, but there are people from the old way of thinking that are holding on to the power structures of the past with a death grip. And then there are other people saying we need systemic change, whether it's politically, socially, in organizations and businesses, but they don't actually know what systems need to change. So I say all of that to really mention that if you understand what causes all struggles within individuals and between individuals, you'll really start asking questions like, well, what do we need to do to create conditions where people don't go into that? It's called inferiority complex. What causes people to go into inferiority complex? And some of today's thinkers like Brene Brown, and Simon Sinek, they're really talking about conditions that cause people to go off the rails, even if it's kind of hidden and they're pretending everything's okay. So that's really the core of changing any kind of environment and creating the kind of successes people want to create. Is you cannot ignore that human aspect of what either causes a person to expand into potential and what causes them to become shrunk in their potential.
Okay, so I need to make sure that I'm clarifying and understanding appropriately. So what you just said in regards to Simon Sinek and Brene Brown are teaching us incorrect?
No, I'm saying that their work is becoming famous because they're bringing in a new way of thinking. For example, Brene Brown talks about shame and vulnerability and how we're such an addicted, obese kind of society because of all of our shame. Well, Adler called that inferiority complex. And even Brene Brown, who's a famous author and speaker, when she goes to speak, people will say, Brene, we really love you. You're funny, you're smart, but how about you not talk about that shame stuff? It's a little dark and it makes people uncomfortable. And her response to that is, until we deal with that, it's my number one platform. Well, that was always Adler's platform, and that's my platform. So really, it comes down to some really basic things that we're doing in childhood with our kids and education at schools. We're doing them in our workplaces, and we're not even aware of these practices and how they cause massive levels of disengagement and discord and struggle. And most people haven't really connected the dots on that.
Well, okay. So what we're really talking about is, thousands of years of human history.
Yes. That's why it's a challenge. One of the things we do right off the bat when we're working with people is this was also a term that Adler created called spitting in your soup. Now, isn't that a beautiful image, Jim? Spitting in your soup. What that means is sometimes we have to take something that's perceived to be wholesome and spoil it in order for people to start saying, okay, I will drop those things and I'll learn a different way. So what we mean by that, and it's super, super core, is that we are using different control tactics trying to really create good citizens, whether it's at home, at school, in a workplace. And we don't even realize that some of these are control tactics. Like some of the more obvious ones are being an autocrat, like, Jim, you do that or else you're in trouble, right? But the more subtle control are things like dangling carrots and kind of bribing people and using judgment, whether it's I'm proud of you or I'm ashamed of you or disappointed in you. Or another control tactic is enabling and overcompensating for people, which actually creates a sense of, I can't do things. I need other people to do things for me, which really shrinks a person's potential because now they have an impression of themselves as less capable. Those may not sound like control tactics, but they actually are. And so we're spitting in the soup of those because they look like they work. And they're socially accepted and socially promoted and supported. Like I saw a sign one time that said, don't be a parent, don't be a friend, be a parent. Well, if you're using control tactics, you can't be a friend as a boss. You can't be a friend as a parent. But if you learn other ways to develop people, you can. So it's even this misnomer that we can't really be both. But it's just because we don't understand that these control models are in the way.
So, okay. Is it possibly that we are just using a different type of, method and approach under the auspice of influence and persuasion?
Yes, it's absolutely influence and persuasion. But what it is the control models are extrinsic influence, right? I'm going to influence you from the outside in. If I don't think you're really capable of motivating yourself, I'm going to dangle a carrot. That's outside in. If I don't believe you're going to do the right thing, I'm going to judge you into doing it by using shame or praise. If I don't believe you can do it, I'm going to do it for you or enable you, or I'm going to threaten you and coerce you. Now, that's all influence. It's just outside in influence. And it works like if I held a gun to your head. But it has a ton of negative side effects. So what you want to do is, how do we create influence that helps people develop their internal motivation from the inside out? And that's a completely different model than the control models.
Okay, so one of my favorite people in the world is Susan Fowler, and she does a lot of work in the science of human motivation. And she talks about the models and the things that we need to do, and really be able to, help people to find things that align with them from an internal motivation perspective. But what happens when you have somebody who is, emotionally stifled? I mean, because here, let's talk about the realities of today's world in the workforce. Is you have a lot of people who are entering the workforce who are, emotionally very immature.
Right.
And so when you start talking about, what is it that you want? What is it that that brings you joy? What is it that, they have no clue at all.
100% agree. One of the things we teach people are, what's the difference between being responsible and not being responsible? And when you're not responsible, you're actually operating out of resentful compliance, or you're rebelling. And it's because you have a belief that you don't have any choices deep down inside. And so you're doing things in a blind spot of reactivity to something. So if you're not operating from that, you're asking yourself questions like, what am I feeling and what do I want? I don't normally do a lot of personal coaching because my coaching is really focused on changing an entire community within an organization. But I happened to help a friend last night, and it was a young man, it was one of her relatives, and he's moving on to going to college. And I know a lot about his background. And so when I talked to him, I said, do you even feel like you know what you want? Or are you constantly operating from, I should, I have to, it's the right thing, it's the good thing, it's what everybody else tells me I should be doing? And that's absolutely what he started to recognize. He goes, I've never asked myself what it is I want. And here I'm expected to go off to college and all of a sudden be this person that knows myself and I don't know myself. And I'm grateful that he's learning it at 18 instead of, because I see people in their 40s and 50s that are like, I've never asked myself, what am I feeling and what do I want? I've lived in this place of reactivity. Either I feel like a victim or I'm constantly in rebellion. Like I remember one time I dated a man and I asked him, I said, why just out of curiosity, why don't you wear your safety belt? And he said to me, well, I'm not letting the government control me. And I said, the government's not even in the car with us. That's an example of a person that's unconsciously in reaction to some kind of authority figure that they've internalized. And they're not really deciding from, what do I want? I mean, this person was a divorcee with kids, and he was willing to go through the windshield because he's going to prove nobody can control him. Can you see how that's a very powerless way of operating? And yet he felt puffed up and powerful from acting that way. So I really believe that what happens to people is because of the conditioning, they don't know who they are. They are emotionally immature.
Well, however, as an organization, we need to have, a persona, an identity, something that, our customers and clients can actually, connect with because they don't say Jane did this or John did this or Jim did this, or, I mean, what they do say is they. I mean, so they see us as a physical entity. And so
Absolutely.
we have to set forth expectations, as an organization. And so you can't just do whatever you want. You can't be whoever you want.
100% agree.
Okay.
I think a lot of people, they think that if we drop these control tactics that she spit in the soup over, that we're going to have this milquetoast permissive environment. It's not that at all. It's the opposite of that. So a persona of a company should be based on personal responsibility, purpose, and values. Social interest is a very important phrase that we use, and it means teaching people to consider the consequences that they're causing others. We can see all over right now, politically and socially, how people are not necessarily focusing on how is my behavior causing consequences to other people. So when you're building a persona for a business, what's good for your employees is good for your customers. And that's really coming to a place of personal responsibility. Most people want to be responsible, but they have not been given the tools and the concepts to let go of these other ways of operating and choose something completely different.
Okay, well, then the other thing I start thinking about, especially when you look at a lot of these organizations, is you're talking about executive functioning and decision-making abilities, and the whole development of the prefrontal cortex. I mean, that's when you start getting into that. And again, if I'm an organization and I have a younger workforce that's coming in, that's not developed. Right?
No, it's not. It's not developed even in a lot of the executives, and it's not developed in the employees. And so the real question becomes, and everybody pretends everything's okay, right? Like, oh, I'm fine. I'm great. I'm going to act like an adult. But deep down inside, a lot of people have no real resources within themselves to be internally motivated and to know how to manage their relationships, their productivity, their engagement, their progress plans, the tools that they need to be using. And so I love it that you mentioned the frontal cortex, because neuroscience says if we're not developed in that frontal cortex, we're operating out of survival. And that's what happens in the inferiority complex, is people are in these internal and external struggles because they're in a survival mode. And whenever people are using control models, they're believing negative, fearful, limiting things about each other. If I'm dangling a carrot in front of you, Jim, it means that I think that on your own, you're going to be lazy and selfish, and that it's my job to motivate you. So all the control models hold a really negative view of human beings. When you hold a responsibility-based model, you have the belief that people are great or they want to be great, even if they don't look like they want to be great. And premise creates a whole different dynamic than the control models.
Well, okay. So needless to say, when you start talking and I'm starting to think about all these different scenarios, both of managing staff, managing self, managing, children who are going to be, part of a future workforce and hopefully a positive society. And when I say manage, I mean, unfortunately, that does come with the caveat and thoughts of people thinking about control, right? But I think, when you start talking about management and leadership, what do you see as the difference between the two?
I love the question. And I want to just use a story to kind of help you see how we approach this. Even when we go talk to some of the largest international conferences on diversity and inclusion, for example, or Agile, or how do we bridge globalization, diversity, and technology with emotional intelligence? That might be a title of a topic. We open with a story about an 8th grader who was being bullied by a teacher, which is an authority figure. And how do you transfer responsibility to that student so that that student can go and manage that relationship with that authority figure? That's what you need in your employees. You need your employees to know how to manage their relationships and figure out their part in things. And yet we don't know how to do that. So I see the difference between managing people and leading people as being, I'm transferring responsibility to you. Like in my bio, you read, by the time my kids were 4, they knew how to lead a family meeting. What was equally important is I'm a steamroller mom who's dominant, and I had to learn how to be a good follower to a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old. And that's what's important in agile transformations, is that people need to be able to be leaders and followers in a very dynamic, flexible, agile way. But if they've never been given the opportunity to do both, over and over and over again, they won't know how to do it when they're called upon in their real world work. And so that I hope that's answering your question, is that the transfer of responsibility and helping people pick up their tasks, what it does for the leaders of a company is it distributes the responsibility to everyone so that the leader isn't feeling like a policeman, or I've got to manage all these people like I'm herding cats. That's a miserable existence for the executives and the mid-level managers. And so how do you transfer that responsibility? So even though people, like you talked a little bit about the impression of a company, and it's they are doing this, they are doing that. Inside of an organization, for example, the question shouldn't be who's to blame or why is this happening necessarily. But the question should be what system, if it were put in place, would fix this problem. And that's why we approach the entirety of the community. Like I had one of my instructors, she was very passionate about, you need to go in and fix the police departments because they're just all this brutality and blah, blah, blah. And I said, Terry, you've forgotten that we don't do it that way. If we were going to try to help the police, we would bring in the religious leaders, the political leaders, the neighborhood, and we would help everybody look at a system problem and what is the system that needs to be replaced. And that way, it's not about blaming and, oh, we got to fix you because you're the bad one. It's more about the system is the bad one. I hope that kind of makes sense.
Well, it does make sense, and that goes back to some of the thinking, and a lot of times it goes back to a lot of the thinkings of some of those folks, like you had mentioned, the system and the teachings of the person who you follow. And you could, if you could, before I go into what I was going to ask, is state who is your mentor in this system?
Well, he's actually a man who lived during the time of Freud and Jung. Alfred Adler. And it was interesting because he didn't receive a lot of press during that time. I read a book about him that was written a couple of years ago by these 2 Japanese authors. And even in the foreword of that book, they said he was at least 100 years ahead of his time. He would be 30 right now. And so I thought when I read that, oh my God, that's what I've been thinking since the 80s, because his psychology ruffles people because you'd have to really look at the win-lose dynamics we're doing and change it. And so where culture evolution is going right now in organizations is dropping hierarchy. Doesn't mean that people don't have authority and roles that are different than one another, but in terms of sharing power, operating from purpose and values is a distributive process in the newer culture evolution. It's about teaching people how to be heuristics, of saying, let me just give you the answers, like there's some kind of formula that they have to follow. Because we can't do that today. Things are changing so rapidly. People have to be capable of creating new solutions on the fly. I mean, we definitely saw that during this pandemic, right? And if you have people sitting there going, just tell me what to do, they're not contributing what they could be contributing. And the other thing that happens is people feel like they have to bring their this like game face to work, and it's not the same person that they are in their personal life. So in the newer culture model, it's about It's about integration. It's about coming in as a holistic person that's the same person in all of these different environments. That's why really good human systems transfer. That's why somebody can learn something in a corporate setting and it works for their relationships in their homes or their neighborhood or their school or whatever, and vice versa.
Well, part of what you're talking, I think, is also we had Dr. Edwards on the show talking about the fourth evolution of leadership, and he refers to collaborative leadership. I mean, there's a whole lot of ongoing development and reprogramming that needs to be done in order for us to modify thousands and thousands of years of human behavior.
I know.
It seems just absolutely overwhelming and daunting, and it causes, people who are even close to retirement saying, "Yep, forget it. That's tomorrow guy's problem. I'm out of here."
Yeah. Well, there's a quote that I love it's by Samuel Arbesman, who said his book is something like the half-life of everything, like things are always going to be evolving. But he said that we have this problem with change blindness. And it's not that we don't see new facts, because people are starting to really see new facts about culture, for example. But a lot of people just don't want to go out of their way to do something different. The other reason that they have a change blindness is they don't really want to look at their own ideas as possibly being outdated. Like none of us would balk at the idea of taking our phones in and upgrading them. But when it comes to our human systems, we think that it's somehow, it threatens our identity if we have to change our human systems and upgrade them. So that's one thing. The other thing is that while it's been thousands of years of conditioning, we are as people evolutionary. Some of us are terrified of change, but a lot of us are eager for change. And so we are, it's kind of like an alcoholic. You know how an alcoholic has to hit bottom in order to change? Our world is in so much turmoil that we're primed for change. That's why people are saying we need change. We need systemic change. The important part of a systems thinker like myself, which is only about 8% of the population, is that we can see what kind of system needs to be put in place so that there's an implementation. It's not just a concept, it's an implementation. How do I shift from this way to that way? So you mentioned collaborative ways of functioning. You can have a collaborative model and still have it being hierarchy. In the model that we use, it's more about everybody develops their leadership so that there isn't so much of a hierarchy, even in a collaborative environment. So people who study spiral dynamics and Ken Wilber's work, they know that even some of the evolutionary stages have still, they've talked about consensus building and collaboration, but they really haven't dropped that power over power under dynamic. That's the new thing that is hard for people to accept. And they do.
Well, and I guess, and there's been constant reinforcement and all that. Plus, knowledge is power, right?
Yes.
The whole father, mother figure, that's inherent powers. Insecurity and vulnerability, and not wanting to fail. If I am, a person, that's me relinquishing power. I mean, to me, I think about all the different power dynamics. And then we even talked before we started recording about how it flips into certain, levels of narcissism, which oftentimes we think ill intent with narcissism. But after talking to you, it doesn't seem like that's the case. I mean, sometimes narcissism is developed out of desperation.
Yes, it's a coping mechanism. It's when we're not in our frontal cortex and we're in survival mode. I think people are unaware of how much they're operating from survival and conditioning. And it's terrifying to some people to consider doing something other than that, because you're right, the public is widely promoting the control models. So what's interesting to me is that we say these sacred cows aren't giving good milk anymore because the sacred cows begin in childhood. And that's something people go, oh, don't go there. You can talk about changing a workplace culture, but don't try to change how I'm doing my parenting or how we're doing education. And yet when you look at parenting and education, there's huge challenges happening right now in those areas, because evolution is required starting in those places too. And I don't even worry about that when I work at the corporation. I already know it's going to change their family dynamics, because you can't learn something and then unlearn it when you go home. So if we've adequately spit in the soup, they're now going, okay, I'll do this new thing. I'm open to this new thing. I'm willing to upgrade the way that I see things. And that does take courage, and it does take, you're right, knowledge is power. That's why our hardest job is educating people on what they don't even know that they don't know around human systems.
As that one meme that keeps getting passed around the internet, pow, this is mind blowing. I mean, it is. And I mean, the whole practical application piece, I think, is such a massive gap for most people. Maybe we'll talk about that in the end, as far as how people can get in touch with you and learn more, because I want to make sure that we go on and we do some of the things that we always do on the show, because I think they're critically important. So, one of those things is looking for, inspiration and finding inspiration. And one of the things that we do on the show is we look for quotes to be able to do that. Is there a quote or two that you like that you can share?
Oh my gosh, I wish you would have asked me in advance. I collect quotes. I put them on almost all of my over 200 articles. I would say that change blindness is a quote that I love. I also love the quote by Einstein, who said that we can't solve the problems that we've created using the same thinking that we used to create those problems. So I sometimes refer to that as, we can't change the problems we have today if we continue to hold on to the control systems that cause those problems, so that I'm connecting those dots. I'm also a big believer that we don't realize our capability. So in the quotes that I focus on, it's really about what you have in you. That like for example, when we teach people how to, we don't just look at the executives defining purpose and values and vision. We look at everyone in the organization creating that. When we do that particular training, we get more pushback, we get more resistance, more fear, more anger from people. And so one of the quotes I love is actually by Marianne Williamson, and it's the quote, "Our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we're powerful beyond measure." So people have this power, but they don't have any idea how to guide it and even trust it. And that's what we did when I was raising my 5 children, is I wanted them to see and know their power, and I wanted to guide it. And we did tons of unconventional things. Like by the time my kids were between 5 and 11, there were 4 of them at that point. We would give them a couple $100 and let them go to the grocery store. Nowadays, I'd probably be put in prison for that or get given a ticket or something. But it was a safe neighborhood, and we trained them how to do it. But the reason we had them do it, and they would get to the checkout and the person would go, "You guys have hundreds of dollars. Where are your parents?" But we wanted them to have experiences of feeling empowered, lovable, connected, and contributing. And they weren't going to get it just talking about it. We had to help them experience themselves as powerful beings. And a lot of people are afraid to encourage the power in people. So what happens is that power gets clogged up in their system and causes them stress and depression and shutdown and all these things, because we haven't known how to give them applications to use their power in a new way.
I think you just frightened a whole lot of people just even going through what you just said right there.
I frightened them? Is that what you said?
Absolutely. I'm talking about the whole risks associated with doing some of those things. And even I was just having a conversation last night with somebody about him who had some rental properties, and he actually had a rentor who filed a civil suit against him for something that had no basis or meaning, and ultimately was thrown out of court. But it cost him $11,000 just the cost to defend himself, because it ended up getting filed and he had to defend. And then also, while that renter was in the space, they destroyed the space. That cost another $15,000. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, when you start thinking about the risks associated with all that today.
I want to reframe that. You're saying, gosh, this idea of us having to shift so much is frightening to people. I want people to look at, what is the risk if we don't do anything different? Like a lot of our clients, one of our clients that comes to mind is he had more than 50% turnover. And he and some of his team did a co-presentation one time, and the audience member asked, what was your biggest concern when you started this shift in the system? And everybody had, well, I thought it was, going to be bogus, or I thought they were going to try to get me to, bare my soul all the time. They all had these concerns. Well, the owner's concern was, my concern was, what am I going to do if this doesn't work? So there's fear and there's fear. And I think it, just like I use the analogy of an alcoholic hitting bottom, you have to be able to see what it's costing you to continue to do it the old way in order to be motivated to say, okay, let's see what you got. That's a
great point. I mean, we have to be able to monetize what we're currently swallowing in or squandering in.
For years, we've had over 70% disengagement, which costs companies anywhere between $250,000 per 100 people to $900,000 per 100 people, depending on what kind of risk it puts for the engaged people to leave. The same is true in our prison system. We have 60 to 70% of prisoners across the United States who do what's called repeat reincarceration or recidivism, where an Adlerian psychology approach was applied in one of the prisons in Florida. The recidivism rate, which is that repeat, went down to 4%. Now, if we can do that with prisoners, why aren't we doing it in workplaces and in families and schools, right? And so that's what we need, is enough people to see the successes of these changes, to say, okay, I want what they have over there.
Hence the TV show, right?
That's the TV show. Exactly. Yeah, that was a really funny occurrence, because the person who is starting this new network and invited me, I'm not, believe it or not, Jim, even though I do these major conferences and everything, I always joke I have to take a Xanax before I get up there. But once I get going, I just forget myself, because I feel so passionately that there's so much unnecessary suffering. So this man came to me and he said, I'm starting this new network, but one of my legacy goals is to create a different kind of society. And I already know you can bring those messages. So I want you to submit a program idea, which we did, which is called Evolve Now. But I had to pray about that, Jim, just to be able to say yes to it, because it's a big deal to put yourself at that next stage of growth. And I told him, I said, I know we're going to receive fan mail and hate mail. And he goes, all mail is fan mail. So I'm kind of used to the idea that when you're changing systems that have been around for centuries, there's going to be some people that are going to be upset. I remember there was a group of people where this one person wrote in their survey, this is ridiculous, making a 4-year-old a leader at a family meeting. You just need to tell them what's what. Even that story threatened that person.
Oh, sure. I mean, to me, I guess you'd have to experience in order to truly believe it, quite frankly, because even when we started talking about the whole human development and prefrontal cortex, I mean, we're talking, men, mid 20s, we're talking, females, early 20s, 4-year-old, there ain't nothing there, right?
Oh, you'd be surprised. We have story after story of how amazing, once you understand the psychology, how you can actually even see the reckoning within 2, 3, and 4-year-olds. That's why some people will say to me, well, can't we use, isn't it appropriate to use the control models when they're 2 and 3 and 4? Not really. You want to start even then introducing models that are not that. Now, it doesn't mean you don't have to do some, like if they're running out in front of a car, but in general, we underestimate their private logic and their use of power. And we don't know how to guide it when they're 2 and 3 years old, but it's possible to do it.
And we kind of do that, even when we see them, replicate and repeat things they see on TV or see us do, right? I mean, talking about instilling some of the, values and things like that, even my kids, which irritates them, but I ask them, why did God put you on earth? To help others. I mean, they learned that when they were little, right? So I get what you're saying. It's just,
they learn it conceptually, but they don't experience it in reality. So we might say that we're here to help the world, and then we have parents that are going to maybe do all these things to us to try to force us to be those people. That's why the kids are saying it that way. Yeah, I'm supposed to help the world, because they haven't bought into it from the inside out.
They do when they're in it, but it's, when the parent says it, it's like, you're just too close to me, right?
That's true. Sometimes we do a lot of good things as children and adults, despite what's been done to us. Because there's a lot of people in good systems at times.
Absolutely.
But there's more people doing unconscious negative behavior. We call it, you've probably heard this before, unconsciously incompetent. and they don't know until they know. And then they become consciously incompetent until they become really committed.
You can't unlearn it, right?
That's right. That's right.
Well, gosh, I mean, for us, there's things that we do on the Fast Leader Show that we haven't been able to get to because we've had such an awesome discussion and dialogue. And I do want to make sure that we finish with a quick hump day hoedown. All right.
Okay.
Because the Fast Leader Legion absolutely wishes you the very best. Okay. So now, hump day hoedown. All right, Judy, the Hump Day Hoedown is the part of our show where you give us good insights fast. And I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust, yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Okay. Judy Ryan, are you ready to hoe down?
Yes.
Okay. So what is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
I would say that it's me learning how to be in strategic partners with global leaders, because my vision is to do my work in partnership with thought leaders and change agents. And so it's finding them, it's finding the places where we can collaborate, because the need is so great, we can't do it as a single individual company. So that's my biggest challenge, is how do I maximize that? I happen to have this personal vision of being connected with a group of thought leaders that together we feel this mutual support with each other, because there's a lot of people that are coming to the same convergence of what I'm doing. They're just coming at it from different angles. So that's my biggest challenge, is how do I find those leaders? How do I collaborate with those leaders? And so thanks for that question.
What is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
I think this is going to sound like a weird one. It just pops in my head. But when I first learned about alternatives to rewarding and punishing people when they misbehave, my very first instructor said, keep spanking your kids until you really realize what you can do instead. And I think for a lot of people, the reason that woman was probably upset that I talked about a family meeting where the 5-year-old or 4-year-old did this leadership thing, people are so hard on themselves. The minute they see something that they realize, oh my God, I could have done it that way, they beat themselves up. Like maybe I ruined my kids because I didn't know that, right? So the reality is we're very resilient as human beings. And if we could just come at things from compassion and curiosity instead of beat up, we wouldn't resist growing. Because if we can't even look at ourselves with compassion and forgive it and realize we're going to be okay, we won't change. So that to me is a weird kind of leadership, but it was like, just keep doing what you're doing, but be proud of yourself that you're willing to look at something new, and you'll get it when you're ready.
And what is one of your best tools that you believe helps you lead in business or life?
I would say my best tool is focusing on my purpose. My purpose is to create a world where people love their lives. So not only am I looking at, am I helping this person love their life? I'm also looking at, am I loving my life? I remember one time my own coach said to me, are you loving your life? And I said, there's only 2 places I'm not. Like if I don't ask the question or have the question asked of me, I may not be looking. And I said, I want to lose weight, which I've so far lost 35 pounds. And I don't like prospecting. And she goes, well, why don't you just fire yourself from that? And I'm like, I can do that. And I did. I fired myself from prospecting and I started working with these strategic partners, and I'm happy because I'm in my own lane. But that's something that, conventional wisdom says you have to be a prospector if you're the CEO to some degree. And to some degree I am. But it just felt like I was let out of jail. So purpose guides everything. And the core values that I hold are servants to that purpose. So like right now, Jim, I want to treat you like you're a best friend and give you everything I possibly can, because friendship is one of my core values. And I already feel it with you. And you're just super easy to talk to besides, because your questions are good and you're really pondering. And I just hope that you're getting as much as I'm getting in this.
Most definitely. Okay. So what would be one book you'd recommend to our Legion? And it could be from any genre.
Okay. God, I have so many books. We even have an article on our website about recommended books. But one of my absolute favorites I read years ago is by Patrick Lencioni. It's one of his lesser known books called Getting Naked. And it's not about hot tubbing. It's about a contrast between 2 organizations, and one of them comes in and is merged with another one, and the old school company is like threatened by the new idea. But basically, it's going into an organization and just starting to help them as if you're already working for them, and being super vulnerable about what you know and what you don't know, which really proves your support more than trying to sell them something or trying to act like you know everything. So that whole concept that he has in that book is incredibly powerful, I think. If more people would just get busy helping, we'd all be selling these new systems without selling them, just because we're all in there helping each other.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find links to that and other bonus information on today's show by going to fastleader.net and doing a search for Judy Ryan. Okay, Judy, this is my last hump day hold on question, but imagine you were given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25 and you can take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you, but you can't take it all. You can only take one. What skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you and why?
Wow, that's a big question. I guess the knowledge and skill that I would take back is that in all things, choose curiosity and compassion. Because when we do that, we have courage. We don't shut down. We don't contract. And, in my 20s, I was learning this information and I was passionate about it, but I was also afraid because I felt so alone in it. But if you have curiosity and compassion, you're being supportive of yourself no matter what. And so that's what I would say. Most people are lacking a lot of that.
Judy, I have had a fun time chatting with you today. Can you please share with the Fast Leader Legion how they can connect with you?
Yeah, I would love it if people would connect with me on LinkedIn. We also have business and personal pages on Facebook, but our website is Life Work Systems. So systems is the only thing plural. A lot of people want to say life works. It's lifeworksystems.com. And then we also can guide you. There's a link to our courses site, which is all about our LMS and learning management system. So I would love to hear from people. I wish I could, talk to everybody that's listening.
Judy Ryan, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and helping us all get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.